welcome to Retro Radio Rumble, a podcast where we talk about retro video games. I'm Nierroh.
I'm producer Dennys.
And we are working our way slowly through the Super Nintendo games, the top 25 Super Nintendo games, and we are playing, reviewing, and rating these and discussing them for you guys. And it's been a whole ton of fun. I don't know about you, Dennys, but I'm having a good old time rehashing the top 25 Super Nintendo catalog. Very nostalgic for me.
Oh, me too. Super Nintendo was a big part of my childhood, so it's kind of fun to go back through some of these, some that I played and have forgotten about, so it's kind of nice to revisit them as we go through this journey together.
Definitely. You appreciate them either more, the older you get, you see, like, these games, like, which one of these games really kind of stood the test of time, and you also see which games, kind of have, like, basically only nostalgia going for them, and when you go back and play them, you realize, like, that wasn't the most fun.
Yeah.
And I think one of those games we'll be talking about today. So today we have Mega Man X, which is not that game. This is a game that stands the test of time. We have, as well, Final Fantasy II, which is actually Final Fantasy IV. And then we'll finish up today with Tetris Attack, the only puzzle game that is on this top 25 list. So with that, let's get right into Mega Man X. So to start off, I love this game. It's one of the games that comes forefront in my mind when I think of the Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, like, it's such a video gamey game. Like, the Mega Man series in general is like, it kind of like, that's a video game. Like, you know what I mean? It's just so, if that makes any sense when I say, like, this is a video gamey game. Like, I don't know. It's just jump and shoot, man, platforming, like, cool enemies. It definitely hits the spot on just what a good video game means. So to give it some history, Mega Man X was developed and published by Capcom, specifically the same development team that had worked on the whole Mega Man series for the NES. Produced by Tokuro Fujiwara, who was involved with many of the classic Capcom games, including Ghosts and Goblins, Bionic Commando, and he actually also conceived of Resident Evil, which was originally kind of like a remake of his previous survival horror game called Sweet Home, which I've never played. So you being a huge survival horror fan, did you actually play that game?
I did, on emulator. But yeah, no, very cool. That is the Resident Evil is the spiritual successor to that, which is, I think they remade Sweet Home recently, too, as like some sort of indie project.
Interesting.
To re-kick that back up, paying homage.
Yeah, I'm not like a super big horror fan. Like, I'm a baby, I'm a weenie. I can't play those games without somebody holding my hand. So I don't have too much.
I love them.
Yeah, that's your jam.
It is. I love getting scared in games.
Tokuro Fujiwara, cool Capcom hero there, and Capcom's made a ton of awesome games for the Nintendo consoles. They're kind of one of the premier publishers for Nintendo systems, along with I think like Konami, Capcom.
Absolutely.
Up there. They made some of the best Nintendo and Super Nintendo games. So, and I think this is one of the best they have to offer. So this is part of the Mega Man series. It's a very, very long-running series. So it's a spin-off of the original Mega Man. It actually kind of has its own timeline, or its own like line of games. So like Mega Man X has like titles leading all the way up to X8 on the PlayStation 2. So this is a huge series. So Mega Man X has since been released like a ton of times over. It's been released for like the collector's edition on the PS2 and GameCube, the Mega Man X Legacy Collection on like all current gen consoles. There was even a remake for the PSP titled Mega Man Maverick Hunter X. So I think this has a pretty big legacy. Basically, it took the concept of Mega Man and gave him the super treatment. We've talked about a lot of games that kind of made the jump from NES to Super Nintendo, and kind of just bumped it up a notch, and this is one of those games where they definitely just made it bigger and better in every way. So it was released in Japan December 17th, 1993, and then January 1994 in North America, and then May 1st, 1994 in the EU. Um, I played Mega Man games on the NES growing up, and I was always a big fan. I had 4 specifically is the one I remember. I played a ton of 4, and that was always a super difficult game for me growing up. Like I could never actually finish that game as a kid. I was a casual, and I never took the time to get good. I think it just
Hmm.
frustrated me, and I never actually beat it. Um, so when I finally got to play Mega Man X, I was hooked because I think they kind of toned the difficulty down a little bit for Mega Man X,
Hmm.
made it a little easier to pick up. Um, so I had a blast with this game. I mean, it was a ton of fun. Like I said, it's such a video gamey game. It's everything good about gaming in all in one package. So it was the first Mega Man game I actually beat, and I can honestly say of all the Mega Mans, and there's a ton of them, this is my favorite one.
For sure. So, like you said, I guess depends on where you started in the series. Because I started with Mega Man 2, which still stands as my favorite one. Even though you could argue that Mega Man 3 is a little bit better because it has all the bosses from Mega Man 2 in it. But when they made the jump to X, which I played much later, I didn't get it necessarily right when it came out. This is one that I got later, and I was a big fan. I played all through all 6 of the ones on regular Nintendo, and I believe there were 6. And I replayed through, I think, the first 4 again, probably the last like 3 years. In the last 3 years, and then played through X, and X is by far the best one out of all of them. Although Mega Man 2 holds a soft spot in my heart, but they ramped everything up, like you said. They gave it the Super Nintendo treatment and just improved it in every way you can. They changed the story too, because the main scientist who's helping you out in the originals is alive, and in this one he's already passed, and you're checking in through memory logs,
Hmm.
which is kind of cool. And kind of how the old games all had, a character like Guts Man, Cutter Man. You have all these guys, and then this one kind of beefed it up because you had, creatures, you had animals. So it was kind of like a cool departure to completely make a new genre of the same game. And I thought they did a great job. Like you said, this one's a little bit more manageable if you're trying to get into a Mega Man. Some of the original Mega Mans are very unforgiving to get into with their difficulty, but this one is a totally achievable game to beat, and it's got a bunch of fun secrets in it too.
Hmm. Yeah, we'll definitely have to get to the secrets. I mean, they put this being a Capcom game, they threw the Hadoken in there at the
Yes.
you could unlock the mystical Hadoken move if you collect all the E tanks and get all the hearts and get all the power ups. And I mean, I think Street Fighter 2 or just Street Fighter in general was at its peak popularity kind of around the same time this game released,
Hmm.
so they had to throw that homage in there. So yeah, this game has a ton of good stuff going for it. Um, so I think with that, man, let's get right into the presentation. So I think this is a fantastic looking game. They did a great job just taking everything to the next level. I mean, Mega Man is really cool looking. I mean, he has just kind of more souped up armor, and as you collect the upgrades, they actually like make his armor like cooler looking, and they actually attach it to the sprite. So I mean, that's a really cool thing to see. In a lot of games, they just do like a palette swap or something simple whenever you get an upgrade. But in this game, they actually like show you getting stronger and getting better, which I thought was really really cool. All the backgrounds look great. Huge, expansive like color palette. Each location is like different and exciting, from Chameleon's forest to flame mammoths, like lava encased lab, chill penguins, like ice and tundra level. Like lots of variety. Just a fantastic looking game. I think the look and feel of this game are kind of what kind of sets it aside and makes it stand out, and have kind of like that staying power. Is just how good, like how well presented this game is for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And compared to the old Mega Mans, which the screen doesn't move, it has to move to the side and load when you hit the edges. This one had moving sequences. It had stopped parts, up and down articulation with the camera. And like you said, the backgrounds in this one look alive. I would argue that this one had the most depth out of every Super Nintendo game. I mean, I'm sure they used the technology later, but I feel like the depth was very well done, to where it felt like things were in the far distance, still interacting with the foreground. It just really had a exciting movement. Like you said, everything about this game speaks action.
Yeah, literally everything about this game speaks action, from like the soundtrack to the characters, everything. Some cool facts about the like the character design. For like the early parts of the game, the supporting character Zero was actually designed to be the main protagonist. So when you first start the game, you're getting beat up by Vile, and Zero comes in and saves you, and he has the long flowing hair and the big red armor. So he was actually designed to be the protagonist of this game, but fearing like a negative reaction of him being a bit too different than from the OG Mega Man that was actually Nick's, and they forced him into a secondary role. They actually had a hard time designing X. The character designer Hayato Kaji, who worked on most of the design of X, said he had a lot of difficulty with the initial design because he was presented with such a expansive palette. Because if you remember, the original Blue Bomber was like so simple, and they made him blue because there's the most blue in the NES color palette. There's the most shades of blue. So it was such like a simple design. So when they brought it to the Super Nintendo, it was hard to kind of retain that iconic look, but make it live up to the power of the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I totally agree. I thought they made him look fantastic. Because, I guess you're right. I didn't even think about it. The Super Nintendo's color palette, I don't know how many colors it is. It's got to be, 128?
It's a lot. I don't know the exact number, but I mean, from jumping from the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo, there's a lot more colors to work with.
Yeah, because, and the pixel size is much tighter, too, so it's got a lot more detail in there. I wouldn't change anything about how Mega Man X looks. And Zero, awesome. That's pretty cool that he was going to be the protagonist. That totally makes sense. That he's like kind of the guy who, kind of steers you through the course of the game for the most part.
I think Zero plays a good role in like showing you like how powerful you can become. Because you start the game off kind of like an underpowered, robot, and you look at Zero and you're like, oh man, I could become as powerful as you. Like that's crazy. So I think his secondary role really fit him. And then if you really like Zero, he got his own series later for the Game Boy Advance. So you could play as Zero eventually, just not in Super Nintendo. And I think this was the first game Zero showed up in. So it's cool that they kind of kept him going as well through the Mega Man series. So on top of those character designs, I think enemy design is also great. I mean, every boss has such a cool, awesome design. I mean, they decided to do the anthropomorphic animal-like androids this go around instead of the Cutman, and different, like the man moniker that they had, they replaced with the animals. And I think that gave it such a cool vibe because they could kind of, Chill Penguin, like he's a penguin. He's shoots snowballs. So I think they did a really cool job kind of reflecting the power and the spirit of the animals they represent with like the level design and the actual like boss. So I think they did a great job with that. I also love, and this is more kind of on Mega Man and less Mega Man X, but I love how every enemy sprite has like a personality. Everything's got a face and eyes. Nothing like nothing doesn't have character. You know what I mean? Like bats and like the little hard hats. Yeah, little hard hats pop up. So I love that about Mega Man. They give everything a personality, which almost makes you feel bad, but everything's a robot. Like even in the I can't remember his full name, but the Chameleon, his level, it's full of trees and like earth, but the trees are actually like machinery, and like the rocks there's like machinery underneath. So they kind of did a really cool job blending the machine like nature element there. So
although the lumberjack robots, I always was like, what purpose do they serve? Because the tree grows and then they hit it, and then the tree grows and then they hit it, and the pieces fly. Who designed that robot? For what purpose?
I guess that was there just to thwart Mega Man on the his eventual uprising. Yeah, it was Sigma. Sigma is like, you're gonna stand here and you're gonna chop this thing and then chuck it whenever anyone comes near you.
Well, some of the other robots make more sense to me. I was always like, who invented this robot?
He's just there to be
what
annoying.
A tortured life, yeah.
Sit there and endlessly cut blocks. It's very Sisyphusian, you know what I mean? Like whenever he cuts a block, there's just another block for him to have to
Oh,
cut.
totally. But they're clearly manufacturing those blocks to be hit. So they're manufacturing for no other purpose than to be whacked at something.
You gotta love video game logic, you know what I mean? Like
Totally.
let's try to make a real world application of like why this happens. Oh man. So I'd say yeah, atmosphere wise, like the varied atmosphere, like the whole tone being exciting and fast paced, like this presentation wise, this game just nails it. Like super awesome, like does such a great job. Unless you have anything more to say about that, I'm ready to move on to some gameplay.
Yeah, I just think every level was designed with a very cool color palette, and I think they used everything to the fullest on the system to make every level varied and unique.
Most definitely, man. So even in gameplay, I think they took everything up, like they kicked everything up a notch. Genre-wise, this is a side-scrolling action platformer, just like every other Mega Man before it, but just pumped up. They took the amps and they moved them up to 11 for this one. So it's got the tight, simple controls that is, every Mega Man shares. You are the jump and the shoot man. You are jumping and shooting your way to victory. They added a few cool mechanics though with this one that kind of sets it aside. One being the wall jump mechanic, which made just movement around the game like much more interesting.
Oh, way better.
They also added new abilities in the form of armor upgrades. So when you go, you find those different capsules that Dr. Light, who was the scientist in the original Mega Man, he's long gone at this point. So you find his capsules and you get the leg upgrades and the armor upgrades, the helmet upgrades, so on and so forth. And those give you a bunch of new abilities which add to Mega Man's movement and the all-around like control of Mega Man. Such as the boots granting the dash, the helmet upgrade allowing you to break the blocks, and the powered up blaster from the arms. So I think all those together kind of made Mega Man just more fun to play in X. Like that's they just I don't know. They just did a good job, man. It's such a fun game.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect action game. It's got the perfect recipe. So when games are designed on the Nintendo, in my opinion, they fell into certain categories, and then from those categories spawned a bunch of different games. And Mega Man, I'd say, has its own formula with from the intro screen, you get to pick what boss you want to fight. You go through his level, and then you get his power, and then use his power to beat, the next robot in line. And that's such a great formula. And in this one, I mean, like you said, their names kind of allude to what their power is, and then their animal identity is kind of like what you expect in the boss fight based on their animal identity. So it's kind of cool how this one made it a little bit more user friendly for somebody to figure out what weapon or upgrade from what character would help you against others. And then some of them are complete mysteries. You find it out and you're just blown away that combination was the one that kills that boss. So this one just really took the original concept and threw it to 1,000%.
Yeah, and this game also, one thing I really appreciate about this game, and I think it's been talked about a lot, is this game does a good job of teaching you how to play it through you actually playing the game. Sort of like an invisible tutorial. I'll liken this back to Aaron Hansen, who's of the Game Grumps fame, had a sequelitis video series under his Ego Raptor moniker back before the popularity of Game Grumps. And one of the games he talked about was Mega Man X, because I think he's stated that that's one of his favorite games as well. And he has the whole series, the whole series of sequelitis, but he has this whole video talking about how Mega Man X just like teaches you to play the game as you go on. And it does a really good job of that. I mean, that first little intro level, which none of the other Mega Mans had, that kind of like boot the game up, and then you go right into that starter level. And within those first few seconds of playing the game, like you learn like, okay, I can shoot, and you learn about consequences. Like enemies are gonna attack, but nothing necessarily surprises you. They always kind of warn you. They even introduce the wall jump mechanic to you by having the ground kind of collapse once you defeat that first kind of wasp-looking mini boss, and then you have to wall jump out. So they're teaching you about the game as you play it. So I think that's something just very clever from a game design aspect that they, that they accomplished with Mega Man X. So on with like all those cool new mechanics and everything. They added some collectibles like the sub tanks, which they've always had, and the health boosts. Kind of like the Zelda like heart containers you get to go find. You still get the boss weapons from defeating the bosses, and there's, like you said, there's still like the typical Mega Man like boss order, like the order in which you defeat the bosses will make the next boss so much easier. Chill Penguin, for some reason his weapon hurts Spark Mandrill, and then the Boomer Quanger, you can chop off Flame Mammoth's trunk if you shoot the little boomerang at him. And another thing I really liked about that kind of mechanic too, of defeating bosses before other bosses, is the levels would change. Like when you defeated Chill Penguin, Flame Mammoth's level would lose the lava, and that was really cool. And that would kind of open up different power-ups. You'd have to go back to the level and get the power-ups there. And I just think like they put a lot of thought into the detail. And definitely, even probably when the game was like close to finish, I think they went back with a fine-tooth comb and they were like, okay, how can we make this like even more clever? And they did a really good job with that.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. A very, very good, polished, and perfectly length game, in my opinion.
Pacing wise, yeah, like pacing is fantastic. I mean, it's not boring, and also like you can beat this game in a sitting easily. There's no save feature, which is kind of a bummer, but it does the password system. And the password's like huge, so it's kind of annoying. Like back in the day, you had to like write that huge password on a piece of paper. Nowadays, you just snap it with your phone, or honestly, we're just using save states anyways. So like, let's be real. But yes, but I mean, you can very easily sit down with a friend and just like beat this game in a sitting fairly easily. I think that's true to most most Mega Man games. So to talk a little bit about some like goals and story of this game, we said it has, at the beginning, this game has a different story than the original Mega Man because it's set far into the future, and there's this like a whole crazy story about the Mega Man X series, which I don't know if they do a good job telling you about that in game. Like there might be some more about it in the manual, but basically the remains of Mega Man X are found 100 years after the original Mega Man series by an archaeologist named Dr. Kane. And basically he clones Mega Man and creates these replicators. And these replicators do a bunch of tasks in the future to make humans' lives easier. And then very typical AI story, like they go haywire, and then they start having to like hunt down these rogue replicators, which they call Mavericks, which hence the Maverick Hunter. And one of the greatest Maverick Hunters, whose name was Sigma, ends up going haywire, which causes Mega Man X to come back out of hiding, and Zero, who's another Maverick Hunter, to go hunt down Sigma and end him. And there's a whole bunch of details in there, but it's just crazy, this whole like Reploid future and Maverick Hunters. They make it far more like crazy and intense than what you get from the game, but it just adds to the whole like Mega Man X goes like knocks up the amps to 11. They really want to make this kind of like a rock and roll like power metal game. And I think that's like a good segue into the music. I mean, like the whole soundtrack is just like they took a guitar and they were just like ripping on it, and this is like the Guitar Shredders like video game. So it's composed by a bunch of people at Capcom. I couldn't find any information about them specifically, but there's like 5 or 6 composers. I think Capcom just kind of circled around a lot of talent there to help with their games. But it's power metal, man. It's epic and intense, and it goes with the pacing of the game very, very well.
Yeah, it reminds me of what became Dragon Force.
Yeah, Dragon Force the game. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, pretty much. Like they're clearly inspired by Mega Man X and Final Fantasy. So
yeah, for sure. I definitely get that. See, I don't really have much to say about the music. I mean, the soundtrack fits it very well. It's just the MIDI approximation of like power metal and guitar shredding. I think it fits the vibe very well.
I love the music when you pick a level. Yeah. It kept a lot of homage to the original titles. So that was kind of cool to throw it back with like the the new 16-bit flair.
Yeah, I think along with the soundtrack, I think the sound design, holds well to the Mega Man series. You got nice little plops when you're shooting the lemons out, and the enemies are making good, cool sounds. The boss music gets intense when you get there. So I think from a sound design perspective, it also just everything kind of fits right in place. Like there's no standout tracks for this. Like I will say there's no standout tracks in Mega Man X that like get stuck in my head. I mean, it's a memorable soundtrack all in all, because the vibe fits so well, but there's not one song from any of the levels that like gets stuck in my head necessarily.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. The boss music most likely for me, because you hear it the most too.
And it's the same track for every boss too. I'm pretty sure, isn't it? Or I
Yes.
might be crazy. Yeah,
I
no.
believe it is.
So I think it's the same boss track or boss music for every boss fight. So I think that it's easier to get stuck in your head when it's repetitive like that. I'm ready to move on to Legacy unless you have anything more to say about the music, the gameplay, or any of that.
I say we hit that legacy.
Right on, man. So in my opinion, this is a quintessential video game. I think this is a must-play video game for all fans of playing games. I mean, it's one of the most video gamey games. It just has all the aspects of what makes like playing games fun. This platforming, shooting, power-ups, like cool enemies, like cool music. Like this is it represents some of the best that old school gaming has to offer.
Yeah, I agree. It's if you're a fan of any action platformer, this is a must play. Graphics 10 out of 10, the explosions, the excitement, everything down to the animations, the backgrounds, the foregrounds, everything like you said earlier just exuberates action. And this is definitely one of the best titles. It's also a very clever game for its time too. Because when you get through all you have to figure out the order for all the bosses, and when you do, you get to a new stage where you got to confront the final boss and go through his levels too.
And it had
like
the
old
secrets too, the Hadoken. I mean, that's so cool that they threw in an homage to another Capcom game and is this crazy secret. I mean, it's pretty easy to assume you would well, I mean, it's easy to assume you'd find all of the power-ups, right? But once you find all the power-ups, you have to go back to Armored Armadillo stage. And then at that last little minecart ride before the boss room, you have to jump off and land on this little like outcropping, and then jump off it and kill yourself 4 times.
Well, so who would figure that out?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know how anyone would figure that out. Like, sure, it's safe to assume you'd have all the power ups, but to like jump onto a ledge and then jump off and then like kill yourself to get the Hadoken, like that's insane. Like, I don't know how. That's probably like an issue of Nintendo Power or something had that, or I don't know, someone's uncle from Nintendo leaked that one, but
it had to be.
That's a cool secret. And when you actually do get that capsule, like Dr. Light jumps out and he's wearing Ryu's attire, and then teaches you the Hadoken, which is the same input, the down diagonal over, button press to shoot that Hadoken, and it has a little voice sample of him going Hadoken, and it one hits every single like anything.
Oh, it's amazing.
Like it one hits all the bosses. It's amazing.
You would never find that on your own. That's why it does so much damage.
Because it makes the game easy mode. I mean, it's still kind of hard because if you get hit once, you don't have it anymore.
To get all the capsules. So it is a little tough, but yeah.
But it's cool that they threw that in there. I think this is the first Mega Man game to have any sort of like secret like that.
Yes.
And I'm not sure how many games in the Mega Man series even did something similar to that moving forward. And there's a ton of them. Like we said, like this game started the Mega Man X series, which is 8 games deep, and kind of propelled the beloved Mega Man series ever forward. It's a huge series, huge legacy. It was popular on the NES, popular on the Super Nintendo, and then all sorts of different styles of Mega Man games have been created. The Battle Network games and Mega Man Legends. Like those games are all really cool, and they kind of kept a little bit of the Mega Man style, but changed it up a bit throughout the years. Kind of moving on to some comparisons. We have some modern games that definitely were inspired by this game. One of them that definitely comes to mind, Shovel Knight. I don't know if you've played that one.
Oh yeah,
it's a really fun platformer that definitely takes a beat from Mega Man X, just from the look, the pacing, like the boss fights, like everything. That's like the spiritual successor to like Mega Man X in a way, just except for you have a shovel instead of a blaster. So I think this game is very important and means a lot to a lot of people.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Sweet, man. I don't really have much else to say about that game. You ready to move on to our second game?
Let's do it.
So the second game today we are going to go over the first of the Final Fantasy games to be released on the Super Nintendo, and that is going to be Final Fantasy II. So Final Fantasy II is actually Final Fantasy IV in Japan, but was released as 2 here in America, because it was the first one to release on the Super Nintendo and the first one right after Final Fantasy, which released on the NES. So it was developed and published by, of course, Square. Directed by series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi and designed by Takashi Takeda. So all the classic Square guys there. So it was initially Final Fantasy III, Japanese 3, not North America 3, was being worked on, and they wanted it to be a more like action-oriented game without like menus and seamless battle systems. But it was definitely not going in that direction. It was kind of more akin to like the traditional Final Fantasy. So a different development team split off to develop that idea of the more like action-oriented seamless battle system, and that became Secret of Mana. So all those games, like Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, Final Fantasy IV, were all kind of subsequently developed around the same time. And you have that time and development history to thank for like all those awesome games. So they initially wanted this to be a kind of a completely different style game, but it ended up not being that way. This is another game in the very popular Final Fantasy series. It's seen many releases and updates from the Game Boy Advance, the DS, even the PSP. And I will say, I think, although this is the Super Nintendo segment, I think the Super Nintendo port of Final Fantasy II is honestly the worst way to play this game. It's just kind of a difficult game to play once you're used to the more kind of modern things that Final Fantasy's done. Even going from, we did Final Fantasy VI before on the show, so we've played that recently. Going back into this one after doing Final Fantasy III, or 6 as we'll put it, is very difficult. It's just the quality of life improvements and the graphical improvements were much, they were leaps and bounds kind of ahead of this game, I think. Mm-hmm. But to backpedal a little bit, this game was released July 19th, 1991 in Japan, November 23rd, 1991 in North America. I think, it's just a little bit conflicting, falls a bit short on the SNES, but at the same time, I think it was a very important game for the series because it introduced some really important aspects of the Final Fantasy series, like the active time battle system was created for this game, and this was the first game to really have like deep storylines with like lots of character development. So with that, I never really played this game until I started up for the podcast, so I'm kind of I don't have the nostalgia with it, and I will say it was kind of difficult. Like I played quite a few hours of it just to try to get enough in me so I could do the podcast, and it was difficult to do, I will be honest.
Yeah, I in a similar sense, because I was never too much into the JRPGs as a younger kid. I moved into them as I, probably in my mid-20s is when I really took a liking to them. So I didn't have the nostalgia either, and I popped it on in a similar sense, and I definitely struggled with this game, especially coming off of playing the one that came out after.
Mm-hmm.
Final Fantasy Final Fantasy VI. I mean, this one by comparison is much tougher. You would have to be a diehard fan or have the nostalgic tie to go back to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's much easier to play. I think the definitive edition, according to like most Final Fantasy fans, is the PSP edition. They kind of do like that 2.5
Gotcha.
dimension like remake where it still has like the 2D background, but they buffed up the character sprites, which I will say, like, I'm a much bigger fan of like Super Nintendo character sprites rather than like kind of the updated character sprites they've done in a lot of the Final Fantasy re-releases. But I think it definitely, like this game specifically, benefited from like the rest of the kind of updates they did to it and those more modern ports of the game. But I mean, this isn't like, obviously it's on this list because it's not a bad game and it's an important game.
Yeah,
it was just hard to play. So let's move on to some presentation. I will say graphics are definitely a weak point for this game. I'd said it before and I'll say it again. It looks more like a beefed up NES port rather than like, a new SNES game. It does have some good uses of the Mode 7 from the Super Nintendo, like when you're on the airships. Not quite like Final Fantasy VI, where they use the Mode 7 graphics on the overworld screen, so it gives it that kind of more three-dimensional look. This just reserves that Mode 7 for when you're in the airships. So it does utilize the Super Nintendo hardware in that sense, but I mean, when you're like in the battles and like the character sprites on the overworld map, being different sizes from the battle map, we talked about Final Fantasy III being the first one to use the same size sprites from the battle transferring over to the world map. So this one, they have like the smaller character sprites in the overworld, which makes it hard for them to kind of show the emotion of the characters when you can't really make out their faces. I mean, the character design itself is cool. It's very classic Final Fantasy. I like the aesthetic of Cecil, the main character that we start off with. He's this Dark Knight captain of these like kind of this like Air Force. I think, what are they called? The Red Wings. And he has this really cool dark aesthetic, and I'm a big fan of that. So I think that's really cool. Like the thought was there. Like, let's create this kind of cool fantasy world. But I think it was just hard to translate that using the hardware at first for them. They really didn't quite bump it up until Final Fantasy III. And I think a lot of what we're saying is kind of because of circumstance. I mean, we reviewed Final Fantasy III before this, and I apologize if I'm confusing anyone. I keep jumping between Final Fantasy III and Final Fantasy VI, but I'm referring to the same game. I'm sure most people pick that up, but I'm confusing myself as I jump back and forth between the two names. But another thing that kind of this game suffered from is the initial translation was pretty awful. I mean, even from like Square standards, because a lot of the translations of the 90s JRPGs were done kind of poorly. One being because memory limitations on the cartridges. Like Japanese characters are much more efficient than English characters are, so it's just harder to fit all that text into the cartridge. Also, at the time, Nintendo of America had some really weird and strict censorship policies. So they took out any Judeo-Christian symbolism, such as changing the name of the holy spell to white and removing any allusion to the concept of death. So the game kind of suffered on that front, which you can't necessarily blame the game for that, but it's just something to take note if you're trying to play the Super Nintendo version of this game. Like, you're going to have to deal with some pretty poor translation. So moving on to characters, there's a 12 character cast in this one, so only 2 less than Final Fantasy III's 14 character cast. And this one is a bit different in the sense that you can have 5 available party members at one time. I think they did 4, and then I think they did 3 for a while, but I think 4 is kind of the mainstay. But they did 5 party members for this one, so that's kind of interesting. And they all have, pretty cool atmosphere to them. The main protagonist, like we said, Cecil, is the Dark Knight he's the captain of the nefarious Red Wings, which is the elite Air Force unit under control of the Kingdom of Baron. And he has his girlfriend, Rosa, who's the White Mage. You have the girl he ends up taking care of after he performs some pretty heinous acts unwittingly, who's called Rydia. And she's like a caller, like a summoner. You come across Tella, who's like an old sage character, and Edward, who's like a bard. So they all have, it's definitely the varied cast of characters that all have their own kind of personas and motivations. And I think that's definitely a strong point in this game. It was the first game to really have those deep kind of like character arcs, and kind of the different character concepts really stood out for this one. All right, so like moving on to gameplay. So it's turn-based RPG, like all the other Final Fantasies. I think from a mechanical and storytelling viewpoint, this game is very important for the series because it was the first game to implement the ATB combat system. And for some reason, they don't actually have the ATB meter present in the combat, which is interesting. You just go when your turn is up. There's no indication that your turn is coming. It's just your character's ready when it's ready. But it's the first to have that ATB system, which was used, in tons of the Final Fantasies thereafter. Other than that, it's very, very typical. Wait your turn, use your attack. Every character's got kind of a special ability. And, some characters have magic. You can use items, you can equip items. I mean, this is the tried and true formula. Nothing too terribly different from that, other than just the addition of the ATB combat system. Story-wise, I think it has a depth and expansive story arc that focuses on some complex situations and good character development, which is very new for the Final Fantasy series at the time. So it's kind of difficult to review this game because it took those elements and kind of, started them for the Final Fantasy series. But it's just kind of difficult to go back and play this game without the nostalgia.
Yeah, it seems like a very traditional turn-based fighting game, kind of I guess moving from the Nintendo style to the Super Nintendo style, just being a little bit more polished. But yeah, it didn't quite have that razzle-dazzle Super Nintendo redone look compared to original Nintendo.
Yeah, most definitely. So I'm ready to move on to music if you are.
Yeah, bump it.
So this was composed by the classic Final Fantasy composer Nobuo Uematsu, and I think that the soundtrack is the highlight of this game for sure. I think this is the best part of this game. The music, it's one of the first games to utilize the SNES hardware for full orchestral sounding music, alongside ActRaiser was the other game at the time that utilized that full orchestral Super Nintendo hardware. It has that emotional, subtle, and masterful work that Nobuo Uematsu is known for. So I didn't get to beat this game. I didn't get all the way through it, but from the very beginning of this game to about the halfway point, like it very emotional, very moving pieces, and I'd expect nothing less from Nobuo Uematsu. I mean, his heart was in this one, just like all the rest of the games he works on. So I think it's a very good soundtrack, and I apologize I don't have too much to say about this game, but to be honest with you, it was just difficult to get through this game after playing Final Fantasy VI.
Yeah, not to start any contention with the Final Fantasy fans, but as a person who wasn't necessarily giant, I was more into the action games than the JRPGs, but at first, and then made the transition. But yeah, some of those I find a little bit more tricky to go back to. I feel like at the time they were great, and from them great things were built from it. But yeah, as a person going back and playing them retroactively, I do find this one a little more difficult to jump to from compared to like a 6 or a 7.
So yeah, I think moving on to like Legacy, I think this game's very important for the fact that it started some very important tropes for the series, like the deep story and the character development and the ATB combat system. I think it was a very important and powerful step, for Square in the Final Fantasy series. But just going back and playing, it's a bit of a chore. And I think if you're going to go back and play this game, play it on a PSP, play it on the DS, play one of the remakes. You'll probably not hear me saying that very often. I'm definitely a purist in a lot of the senses of that I want to play this on the original hardware it was released on. But it's difficult. Even a big Super Nintendo fan like I am, and JRPG fan for that matter, I have difficulty finishing this game. So I mean, those are my comparisons for it. Sorry, fans of Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo, that we didn't talk too in depth about your game. It's a good game, but it's just a difficult game to play on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I would totally second that.
Well, with that, man, let's move on to the third and final game of the evening, and that is going to be Tetris Attack. I wanted a puzzle game for the list, and this is the best puzzle game that the Super Nintendo had to offer.
Really?
I think so. I mean, not a lot of games No, there weren't a lot of puzzle games for the Super Nintendo. They had some. I mean, I'm trying to think of.
Did they have like Bust a Move? Was that on the?
You know, I don't know if Bust a Move was on the Super Nintendo.
Because that one I liked. You know, not that I got anything against Tetris Attacks. I like original Tetris. This is kind of like a different spin on Tetris.
This isn't even Tetris, dude. Like, that's the weird thing about
It's a
Tetris
completely
Attack.
different
Because it's
game.
not. It has nothing to do with Tetris. But I think they threw the name Tetris on it because they knew it would sell the game.
Well, it's almost like a hodgepodge of Mario and Tetris.
Yeah, exactly. It's Yoshi's Island meets a puzzle game. So
Yeah.
it has the aesthetic of Yoshi's Island, but like the puzzle mechanic, and it's not. This is not Tetris. Like there's
No.
no parallels between that game and this game, other than that they're puzzle games, which is really funny. This is called Tetris Attack. So to talk about some development, it was developed by Intelligent Systems, which is a Japanese game developer closely affiliated with Nintendo, and we have talked about them, and we'll talk about them more throughout these games because they're a very important company. They developed Duck Hunt. For the NES. They developed the Fire Emblem series. They worked on Super Metroid. They developed the Paper Mario series. So like very prolific and important team that worked with Nintendo. It was published by Nintendo and then produced by Gunpei Yokoi, and he is a very important longtime Nintendo veteran. So he worked with Shigeru Miyamoto on some of the very early Nintendo games like Donkey Kong and Mario Bros. And he helmed the Nintendo R&D1 team that was responsible for much of the hardware created by Nintendo. So Yokoi is actually credited with designing both Rob the Robot for the NES, and more importantly, he created the Game Boy.
Oh, very cool. Yes.
So definitely an important figure for Nintendo. He had kind of a tragic end at the company because he also worked on the Nintendo Virtual Boy, which was the last project he'd work on at Nintendo. And although Nintendo will not state this, he retired shortly after the market failure of the Virtual Boy. And like I said, Nintendo will say that this is just a coincidence, and so will Gunpei Yokoi will say this is just a coincidence. I just retired on my own accord. But, it's kind of coincidental that he would leave the company right after the failure of the Virtual Boy.
Yeah.
So he went off to start his own company. I don't think they did anything terribly of note. So he worked on Tetris Attack. And like we said, although has Tetris in the name of it, there is nothing to do with Tetris other than that it's a puzzle game. Some sequels and remakes were, however, made. But they ended up changing the name, probably because of that reason, to Puzzle League. So,
all right, that makes sense.
So you've probably seen Pokemon Puzzle League.
Yeah, because it's funny because when you look at it, I mean, it's got the same window as Tetris, and you got blocks, but the concept is to switch them, kind of more like, is it Bejeweled?
Almost, yeah. I think it's closer, in my opinion, to Bejeweled than it is to Tetris, for sure. Because you swap the blocks like horizontally. That's literally all you do is you swap blocks horizontally. So it was released October 27th, 1995 in Japan, August 1996 in North America, and November 28th, 1996 in the EU. A Game Boy port was released alongside the North American and EU releases of the SNES game, so it kind of released simultaneously on two different consoles there. It's probably why Gunpei Yokoi was on it, because this was also a Game Boy port. But I never played the Game Boy version. I've just played the Super Nintendo version, so I won't be speaking to that part at all here. To summarize the game, it's just a charming and fun puzzle game featuring Yoshi's Island aesthetics. I mean, that's it. It's very simple. It's a very simple game. Never actually played it until reviewing it for the show. So I played it for the first time just recently, and I will say it's a lot of fun to play. Like, surprisingly so, it's a fun puzzle game. Like, when I did sit down to play it, I figured I'd just be playing it for a few minutes to get the gist of it. But I found myself actually going back to it quite a few times and like sitting with it for a while just because I enjoyed the charm of it.
Yeah, it's got cute aesthetics. I mean, at the core, it's a puzzle game. But yeah, I mean, it's nice that they have the Yoshi characters and some of the sound effects and some of the music from the Yoshi's Island. But yeah, just overall, same type of thing. I sat down to play it I probably played it for about 2 hours. I'd probably come back to it if I was killing time.
Yeah, so
I prefer Tetris, though. Real Tetris.
I mean, real Tetris was groundbreaking. That's That's a
It's
whole
one of my favorite games.
yeah, that's a whole nother story. Like that's a game that introduced gaming to a lot of people. So
I was a little offended that this title used the word Tetris, and it's
it
gotta
upset you.
be because he designed, the Game Boy, and Tetris was the launch title. So you gotta wonder.
I think they just slapped the Tetris moniker on there because they knew it would sell the game. Like, to be honest, I think it was a marketing thing. Um, but yeah, moving on to presentation, there's really not much to speak about here because it's a static puzzle game. You know, you got your cute little backgrounds featuring Mario characters, specifically like the Yoshi's Island palette. The shapes and colors from the puzzle pieces themselves are, easy to differentiate from each other. The color palette's very bright and pops, so it's easy to play there. But it's just fun and simple. You got your little window with the puzzle. It's static, and then you got the background. So really not much to speak of graphic wise. I think the Yoshi's aesthetics like kind of fun and simple. Kind of gives you that lighthearted vibe, but really not much to say about it.
Yeah, they could have called the game Yoshi Attack.
I mean, but then it sounds too.
It has more to do with Yoshi than it does with anything Tetris
And
related.
you know what? Calling it like anything Attack is kind of weird because it's like a peaceful, fun puzzle game. Like, why do they put Attack in the name? I think
I'm
this
so
is a
perplexed by-
misnamed. Sorry, go ahead.
Totally. I'm so perplexed by the whole concept of this game.
Yeah, it's kind of like a misnamed game. Like it was handled a little weird, but I mean, it's still a fun game. Like I think as far as puzzle games go on the system, I mean, it's a good game. I had fun with it. One thing I didn't get to do that I would like to do is play the multiplayer aspect. I mean, the versus mode is multiplayer against the computer, but I think it would probably be a lot of fun playing it with friends. And with that, why don't we just go ahead and segue into gameplay? See, there's not much to say about this game. So yeah, very simple controls. Move the cursor with the D-pad. Switch blocks horizontally with the press of a button. The whole gist of it is the player must use the on-screen cursor to arrange colored blocks into horizontal or vertical rows, matching together 3 or more blocks of the same color to destroy them. And then blocks above the clear line will cause cause this and can be used to cause chain reactions. I'm sorry, I'm like reading through my notes here and getting tongue twisted. But basically, once you destroy blocks, those blocks will fall, and those can cause like the chain reaction, and that's typical of puzzle games like Dr. Mario or Bejeweled. So that's why I think it's much more like that than it is Tetris. Because Tetris doesn't have that mechanic at all. There are also multiple game modes. Story mode, which pits the player against a series of computer-controlled opponents. Endless mode, which is exactly that. You're just challenged to play as long as possible with continually rising stacks and increasing speeds. Time mode, which has you score as many points as you can within the 2-minute time period. Stage clear mode takes the player through a series of stages in which the objective is to clear all blocks underneath the boundary line. There is puzzle mode, which ended up being one of my favorites, in which you are provided with a number of puzzles that must be cleared by like a set amount of moves. So like blocks don't rise towards the top or otherwise move. You just have to make a good use of combos to kind of solve these puzzles. So I found myself playing that mode a lot. I really enjoyed that one. And then of course, like we said before, there's the multiplayer mode, which has time attack and versus. So very simple. There's not much to it. Just get in, play the puzzles, have a good time. Like they kind of have some flavor text in between the story mode, but there's really not much going on there. Just kind of just filler or fluff, if you will.
I'm a Dr. Mario man. I'm a puzzle bobble man.
Yeah.
I like bust a move. I don't know. This game's all right. I think the title's a little misleading, which kind of maybe offset me initially. But like it's an endearing game. It's made to be fun. Not my favorite puzzler out there.
No, not mine either. I mean, it's a fun game. It's solve puzzles, have fun. Super simple. But yeah, there's just not much to this. If you're gonna play a puzzler, like, I'd probably rather play Dr. Mario on the NES than Tetris Attack on the Super Nintendo, and that's going back. So I mean, there's something to be said with that. Like, I think it's a cute game. I think it's a good game. It's very middle of the road.
Yes, I would agree.
So cool, man. Let's just move on to music then. So this was composed by Masaya Kazumi, and I could not find anything else she had done. But I will say she did a good job making relaxing music to fit the simple puzzles.
Absolutely.
Nothing really stands out, but you feel good while you're doing it. And one thing of note is the change in music when the puzzle blocks start to reach the top of the arena. That's anxiety inducing. That's good of the good of the puzzle genre. Like make the music faster, more crazy. But this is like a complete change in music once the puzzle gets to the top, which never fails to give you that feeling of anxiety. So.
Yeah, you start sitting up and leaning forward and
yeah,
trying
exactly.
to make sure you don't mess up. Yeah, it is good.
Focus. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool, man. I mean, unless you have anything more to say about this game, I know we kind of blazed over these last two games, but to be honest, there's just not much to say about these last two games from my perspective.
Yeah, and not to say anything, and not to say the games aren't good at all. It's just as we get further down the list, we're going to start hitting points where we might not necessarily agree with the list as much.
Yeah, or we don't have the nostalgia because we're getting further down the list, so they're not like
absolutely
classics we may have played. So yeah, moving on to Legacy then. This game started the Puzzle League series, which I haven't played much of. I played Pokemon Puzzle League. That was a pretty interesting game for the Game Boy, but that is really all I've played coming from the Puzzle League series. So I don't think this game necessarily has a huge impact other than, if you wanted to play a puzzle game on the Super Nintendo, this was a fun one to go to. Like, you're going to have a good time, if you rent this game from the video rental store, back when video rental stores existed, which everyone listening to the Retro podcast, I'm sure remember video rental stores, but if you are much younger, then maybe you don't. But, yeah, if you rented this game at the rental store and brought it home, like, you would have a good time with it. You would not be disappointed. But it's also nothing that's gonna stick in your mind and be like, wow, like this was such a cool Super Nintendo game, and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for some people they do feel that way, and if you do, like, right on, that's awesome. And I'm sorry we didn't have more to say about this game, but I think it's just a simple game with a simple concept.
Yeah, I think it's just what you played, because when Tetris, I'll speak at length about Tetris because I do enjoy that one. And Bust a Move, too. This one I thought was cool, but, I mean, it's kind of like Dr. Mario. Dr. Mario's like a perfect marriage of Tetris in this game, which is kind of cool that there's a different variation. But, yeah, it definitely is not – it's on the list of top 25 because it's a good game, but it's definitely not one of my favorites.
Most definitely.
Not to bash the game. I'm not trying to,
No, for sure. And I think I
misleading name.
I meant to look it up real quick because I was sure there was one when you mentioned it. But I think Bust a Move did have a Super Nintendo port at some point. They did, in fact, have a Super Nintendo port. But when I think of Bust a Move, I always think of the arcade version. Because we have a pizza shop in town, and I haven't been there since I was a kid. But they had a Bust a Move machine, and I loved that machine.
Oh, I love that machine. And Think in America on Super Nintendo, it was called Puzzle Bobble, and it was the puzzle adaptation of Bubble Bobble with all the same characters and stuff from the original Nintendo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was Puzzle Bobble. That's the one. Yep, you are correct, sir.
Oh yes.
So cool, man. It's kind of a quick run through today, which is good. I don't like taking too much of everyone's time when, we're pulling 2 hours trying to consolidate it a bit for you guys. But if you're sticking it out, we definitely appreciate you. So let's put these games on our list. Let me send you the ranking list. Unless you have it, or do you need me to send it to you?
Yeah, copy it to me in the chat.
Get it, the old chatteroo. It formats it kind of stupid, but...
Well, I kind of already know where I'm going to put some stuff, too.
Oh, yeah, it's, we definitely got some stuff that's going to have to move with Mega Man X, man. So, already looking at this, I think Mega Man X, it's going to be hard to place, because I don't know, man. I'm thinking I want to put this right below Super Mario RPG, personally.
Oh, that's where I wanted to do it.
Are we agreeing? Are we agreeing about it?
I think we are.
Perfect, because we don't always agree, and then we have to argue about it. But
So at first place, we got Super Mario World. Second place, Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Third place, Final Fantasy III, which is 6. Fourth place, Chrono Trigger. Fifth place, Super Mario RPG. And then at sixth place, taking over what Super Metroid was, we will be putting, I think so, right? Mega
I
Man
think
X.
Mega Man X right there makes sense because, like, it's not an RPG. It's different, kind of splitting that block
Yeah.
there. And I think this game, like I said, being like one of the most quintessential just video games to play on the system, it deserves to be pretty high on the list. I don't think it's like genre defying or groundbreaking, like let's
No,
say like Chrono Trigger or like Super Mario World. But I
I
think
agree.
it's like just like a perfect Super Nintendo game for bringing Mega Man over and just being just a fun game. So I think that's definitely a fair spot for it is number 6, right up above Super Metroid. And I feel so bad for Super Metroid because it's such a good game, but we keep pushing it
Yeah.
down.
This one's more universally playable, though. I feel like Super Metroid's like a big boy version of this game a little bit.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, because Samus can jump and shoot, but Samus can also jump and shoot in different directions, and up and
And the
like solve
levels are much
puzzles.
more intricate.
Yeah, it's more mature. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's hard putting it right above Super Metroid, but I think it definitely exists somewhere near Super Metroid, and I'm gonna put it
I
higher
agree.
because of the accessibility and just because when I think Super Nintendo, this game is always in the top of my mind as
I
far as
agree.
games that are awesome to play on the system. I think it's gonna be much easier to place these next two. Honestly, like I thought we were
Yeah,
gonna
me too.
talk about this a bit more, but I think I want to put um, Final Fantasy 2. I want to put it right below Earthbound and right above Street Fighter 2 personally. Because I think, although we didn't like it that much, I think it did some really important stuff for the RPG genre.
I don't know. I mean, I think it should go a little bit lower just because I feel like we've already got the upper echelon of Super Nintendo Final Fantasy games high up on the list.
It's very
And then
true.
an offshoot of that same type of style from Chrono Trigger, because essentially they were going to be the same
I mean,
game
they're
at one
Square
point.
games, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then you got Secret of Mana, which is also a third variation of that same genre,
Hmm.
and that's I feel like this one should be lower. Only though it did lead to better things.
Uh-huh.
I just feel like we've already got better representation up on the board at the higher in the top 10 spots.
So where would you like to put it? Because there's only two other games below that.
I'd put it below Super Street Fighter 2, so it
So
would be going right above Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island.
I can concede to that only because we don't have a fighting game up here. Street Fighter 2 is the only one.
And I agree, and if we're gonna represent one up there, there has to be one up there
All
at
right, that
least.
makes sense to me. I'd stand by that. So I think with that, then we would put Tetris
I
Attack.
mean,
I think
we
it's
all
the
know where
bottom
it's
of the
going.
list, right? This is
Well, just because as far as substance, you could probably beat the entire game in an hour and a half, I'd think. If you
yeah.
sat there and played through the puzzles.
I mean, yeah. There's just not much to it. It's just a simple puzzle game. I mean, it's not a bad puzzle game, but like
Definitely
there's games on
not.
this list that are like defying genres and like
I've weeped at some of these.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. Like
there's
super
parts in
emotional
6
games.
that make you weep.
Yeah,
Like,
for
they're
sure.
big. They're big moments.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. This is a baby game. Put at the bottom of our list.
That's what I'm saying. Not to like dog it.
No, if you really like this game, then that's awesome, and that's really cool. And it's still on our list of top 25 games, which means it's an honored game.
It's a good game. It's just out compared to the others, I have to disagree.
Yeah, so I think that's safe. So we have 15 items now. So go ahead and let's
Woo.
read it down from the list. We got Super Mario World is number 1. Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past is number 2. Final Fantasy 3 is number 3. Chrono Trigger number 4. Super Mario RPG number 5. Mega Man X now newly placed as number 6.
Yes.
Super Metroid number 7. Super Mario Kart number 8. Secret of Mana is number 9. Star Fox is number 10. Earthbound number 11. Street Fighter 2 number 12. Newly placed Final Fantasy 2 is 13. Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island is 14. And then finally, ending today, we have Tetris Attack as 15.
So I could confidently tell like a friend of mine to definitely play those top 10 games, and I feel like I just gave them the ultra list of games to play.
Yeah, like you would have so much fun. And if you never played any of those games and you just worked your way through that list, you'd be like your life would be changed dramatically for the better. Like
Absolutely.
I can honestly say that.
That's a top 10 there.
Definitely. So I'm very happy with this list at this point. We have 10 more games to go before we finish up the Super Nintendo segment of the Retro Radio Rumble.
including some I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, definitely, man. There's still some really good games on this list. Like, I think we're gonna shake up the list a little bit because there's some good games to go. And then also, I'm excited to do our end of list segment that we talked about of doing some of our personal favorites that don't make these top lists. You know, some B-sides, if you will. But let's see. Next episode, we have definitely some really good ones. Two of my favorites. We have Donkey Kong Country, Super Punch Out, and then F-Zero, which I love. Donkey Kong Country and F-Zero.
I like all three of those games.
Yeah, Super Punch Out I suck at, and maybe that's why I don't like it as much. But Donkey
That
Kong,
was fun.
yeah, I mean it's a good game. I played it last night actually, just because getting ready for doing on the show. But I can say Donkey Kong Country is like a childhood defining game for me. Like that game's up there with Super Mario World as far as like games that I like went over to a friend's house to play, and we just stayed up all night like beating that game. Like that's an important game for me personally. So I'm very excited.
So, looking into the future, which one makes you worried on our top 10? Because clearly Donkey Kong Country belongs in at least the top 5 in my opinion.
Dude, that's tough, man. We're gonna have some discussion about placement of Donkey Kong Country. And then we have games further on down the list that are really good games. They're gonna shake it up. We still have TMNT, Turtles in Time.
I mean, one of my favorites, and I recently played through that. I play through that probably every 2 years.
Interesting. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I recently played that with your brother actually, because that's a really good one.
You can beat that in one sitting too.
Very short game. But anyways, we could talk about these games forever, which is why we do this podcast. But we could save most the banter for the later episodes of the Retro Radio Rumble. So with that, thank you guys very much for tuning in and sticking with us. I've been having a ton of fun doing this podcast. And if you guys could, give us a like and subscribe on whichever podcasting platform you're listening on. And, also we'd really think it was cool if you were to go to the Twitter and shout us out and maybe put into some discussion on what you think about these games. Because I know you guys got some opinions. I know everyone's very opinionated on the games they love, and I'm sure someone has some very good things to say about Tetris Attack and Final Fantasy 2, kind of blew past those games today, but not because they aren't good games, but just because, for us personally, we didn't have too much to say on the matter. But with that, guys, thanks again so much for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.
Be safe, everyone.